Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into something a little different, a little playful, and maybe just absurd enough to lull you into that perfect relaxed state. Imagine slipping into a world of silk slippers and gold-plated chamber pots, because tonight you're stepping straight into the past. Not just any past, but the polished, candlelit, over-the-top life of a Victorian millionaire. You're about to live like the top 1% of 1875, back when your wealth wasn't measured by stocks or crypto or sports cars, but by how many servants you could summon with a tiny bell, and whether your dinner jelly wobbled at just the right angle. So before we start this journey, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, slide under your clean sheets, maybe turn on a fan for some soft white noise, and get ready to drift along with me. And hey, don't forget, if you enjoy this kind of slow, cozy history, take a moment to like and subscribe. Leave me a comment too. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love knowing if you're in Boston at midnight, or maybe out in California winding down after a long day. Now, picture this, it's London, the heart of an empire, and you've just woken up in a velvet-draped bedroom. Congratulations. You're not just comfortable, you're obscenely rich. Rich enough to afford a seat in Parliament, or, at the very least, a spectacularly uncomfortable velvet chair. The very first thing you notice isn't an alarm clock buzzing or a phone screen lighting up. It's the faint, careful shuffle of slippers on thick Turkish carpets, the soft rustle of heavy curtains, and the low, mournful groan of a boiler downstairs that's been chugging away all night just to keep your toes from freezing. Someone has already been up for hours making sure the fire doesn't die, and someone else is about to walk in with a tray, balancing your glass of water and your morning paper. You haven't even opened your eyes, and 3 people are already apologizing for something. The ceiling above you is painted with cherubs. Not the cute little Hallmark ones, but full-sized baby angels staring at you like disappointed teachers, keeping track of how late you're sleeping in. You'd like to roll over and ignore them, but you can't quite shake the feeling that the one over your pillow is silently taking notes. The bed you're in is big enough to fit a cricket team, which sounds nice until you realize it means your feet are always cold, because Victorian heating just doesn't stretch that far. Somewhere outside your room, a bell rings. It's not an alarm, it's a signal to the entire house that His Lordship you has finally woken up. That one sound kicks off a chain reaction downstairs, the cook stiffens, the maids scatter, the butler straightens his waistcoat, and breakfast prep begins like a military campaign. You pull the covers up a little tighter, enjoying those last drowsy minutes. But before you can settle, the door creaks open. A housemaid steps inside with a kind of timid grace that comes from years of knowing her whole job is to be invisible. She sets a glass of water down on your bedside table. It's lukewarm, filled exactly 7/8 of the way up, because anything less would be rude, and anything more might risk spilling. She apologizes anyway, for the temperature of the water, for the lateness of the newspaper, and even, in some vague way, for the despair of Victorian plumbing. You nod, trying to look gracious, even though all you wanted was to roll over. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch the faint movement of someone else in the hallway. Maybe the butler, maybe just a shadow. Whoever it is, they're already ready to swoop in and remove the glass the second you put it down. The sheets beneath you are crisp, almost too crisp, like they were ironed within an inch of their lives. You're slightly afraid you might cut yourself if you move too suddenly. The mattress is stuffed with enough springs to make you bounce like a toy if you shift the wrong way. Every detail of this room is designed not for comfort but for display. The curtains are velvet. The rug is hand-woven. Even your slippers, waiting just by the bed, are lined with wool so soft it might as well be actual sheep. When you slide your feet into them, they feel absurdly plush and also slightly impractical, as if someone thought footwear should double as furniture. Leaving the bed is an ordeal in itself. First, you wait for your valet to arrive, carrying the robe you're expected to wear. It's embroidered with so many patterns, it looks like a tapestry pulled off a cathedral wall. He helps you into it, because God forbid you try to dress yourself. Then you're guided toward a chair set aside for one purpose, sitting while someone else brushes your hair. It's all a performance. Every moment from the second you open your eyes is staged to prove that you are important, wealthy, and absolutely not doing anything on your own. Think about that for a second. Today, we might think of being rich as being free, being able to do whatever you want. But in the Victorian era, being rich meant being constantly watched. Every sip of water, every stretch, every time you put on slippers, it was all judged, whispered about, and reported back to someone in the house by lunchtime. Even the dog probably noticed. Your morning wasn't just a routine. It was a theatre production with you as the star, and a cast of servants making sure you never forgot your lines. And yet, for all the grandeur, there's something strangely uncomfortable about it. The bed canopy is so loaded with fringe and tassels that you risk bringing half of it down if you stretch your arms too wide. The windows are locked tight, not just for safety, but to keep out two things considered equally undesirable: fresh air and poor people. Outside, London is bustling, noisy, crowded. Inside, it's quiet and smothered, with every sound softened by thick carpets and every movement cushioned by servants. Your dressing gown, meanwhile, isn't where you left it. That's because it was whisked away in the middle of the night to be pressed, perfumed, and repressed again until it smelled of something vaguely called essence of empire. In its place are slippers that look like sheep, a robe that weighs as much as a blanket, and a lineup of clothes chosen for you because, apparently, the danger of picking out your own shirt is too great for someone of your status. The whole process of just getting upright takes as long as most people's commutes. By the time you're fully awake, your schedule for the day has already been read to you like a court proclamation: breakfast at 9, correspondence at 10, perhaps a light stroll through the conservatory if you're feeling ambitious, though you probably haven't actually been inside it since before the Crimean War. That's the irony. For all the wealth, for all the grandeur, your day is boxed in by routines and rituals meant less for comfort and more to remind everyone else just how wealthy you are. There's a funny kind of pressure that comes with this lifestyle. Even if you wanted to be casual, even if you wanted to roll out of bed, pour yourself some tea, and eat a piece of toast in your pajamas, you couldn't. That would be scandalous. The whole point of being a Victorian millionaire wasn't to enjoy comfort. It was to demonstrate it, to show off, to let every guest, every servant, even every family member know that you were important enough to have layers of ceremony wrapped around the simplest parts of your day. And so you play along. You sit while someone brushes your hair. You let your valet pick which of the 3 shirts you'll wear. You nod solemnly at the newspaper reporting on your own stock prices. You let the housemaid curtsy one more time before she retreats backward out the door. By the time you stand up, wrapped in wool and dignity, you feel less like a person and more like a symbol. A symbol of wealth, of status, of a life that looks glamorous from the outside, but feels strangely hollow inside. It's still early, though. The fire flickers in the hearth, the sound of footsteps fades in the hallway, and somewhere far below, the kitchen is clattering with activity. Breakfast is coming. More servants, more silverware, more theatre. But for now, you take one last look around your ornate, over-decorated room. The cherubs on the ceiling still stare, the curtains still hang heavy, and the slippers still make you feel faintly ridiculous. This is your world now. Welcome to the life of a Victorian millionaire, and that's just the first hour of your day. You've survived your first hour as a Victorian millionaire. You're out of bed, wrapped in a robe that weighs more than some people's wardrobes, and your slippers look suspiciously like they were stolen from an actual sheep. But don't get too comfortable, because now comes the next great battle of the day, getting yourself clean and presentable. Forget about rolling into the bathroom, flicking on the light, and turning the shower knob until the water feels just right. In this house, bathing is not a private moment of self-care. It's a full-blown team event that straddles the line between survival and performance art. The Victorian bathroom is an arena, and you are about to enter it. Step across the tiles, cold enough to make your toes feel like they're filing a complaint. The room itself looks impressive: marble everywhere, a porcelain throne in one corner, and a bathtub so big you half expect to see sailors rowing laps in it. But don't be fooled. Behind the grand décor is plumbing that sounds like it was designed by someone who only ever read about hot water in a newspaper. Pipes rattle, hiss, and occasionally scream like ghosts in the walls. Every time you turn a tap, you don't know if you're about to get ice water straight from the Arctic or boiling liquid hot enough to cook a lobster. Bathing here is more like gambling. One moment, you're lowering yourself into what feels like a frozen pond. The next, the temperature surges, and you're suddenly regretting every life choice that led you to this point. Somewhere behind the folding screens, servants hover. Valet, bath attendant, maybe even a plumber who sleeps in the walls and only emerges when disaster strikes. Privacy is not on the menu, and yet there's an art to this chaos. The bathwater has been carried up in buckets, red-faced servants running back and forth from the kitchen boiler. If you're lucky, they've mixed it to a tolerable temperature. If not, you'll find yourself wading through a lukewarm compromise that feels like yesterday's tea. Soap comes in hard, perfumed bars, so dense you could probably use them as bricks. They smell faintly of lavender, roses, or something called violet essence, which is just Victorian code for covering up the fact that everyone is sweating under layers of wool. Towels, monogrammed of course, are laid out with military precision. A footman stands nearby, eyes carefully averted, ready to offer you one of those towels with the solemn gravity of a knight presenting a sword. You want privacy? Too bad. Bathing is a communal event. You, the towel boy, the valet, and whoever else decided to wander in. Even the dog might peek his head around the folding screen to judge your technique. Toothbrushing is no better. Your brush is made of bone and bristles, so stiff they could probably scrub a floor. Instead of toothpaste, you get a chalky powder, charcoal, chalk, maybe some mystery ingredient the apothecary swore would strengthen teeth, but probably just scratches enamel. You swish water from a silver cup, grimace, and hope your breath smells more like roses than regret. Deodorant doesn't exist yet, so the best you can do is splash on cologne or tuck a little pouch of herbs into your clothing. Basically, you're praying the perfume lasts longer than your next carriage ride, and heaven help you if something goes wrong. Maybe the pipes start rattling like they're about to burst. Maybe a servant slips on the wet marble and sends half the bathwater cascading across the floor. Maybe the boiler hiccups, filling the whole room with clouds of steam, so thick you lose sight of the towel rack. In those moments, the bathroom turns into a slapstick stage, and you're the unlucky star by the time you emerge, dripping, red-cheeked, and mildly traumatized. You're less refreshed and more just relieved you survived. Now comes the dressing ritual, and let's be clear, dressing in Victorian England is not something you do alone. It's a team sport. Your valet stands ready, arms piled high with trousers stiff enough to stand on their own, shirts with collars sharp enough to cut skin, and waistcoats embroidered so heavily they might as well be family crests. If you're a woman, it's even more complicated: chemise, stays, corset cover, petticoats, bustle, and then finally, the actual dress, which requires at least 3 people to lower over your head like you're being costumed for a stage play. For men, the corset might come out too. Yes, gentlemen wore them sometimes, because apparently it wasn't enough to run a business empire. You also had to have the silhouette of a wardrobe with legs. Your valet laces you in, tugging until you can barely breathe, and suddenly you're aware of just how much money you've paid to feel this uncomfortable. The shirt is starched so stiff it could double as building material. The collar clamps your neck like a medieval torture device. And that's before the cravat gets tied with such precision that it could take you a week to undo it. Women have it even tougher. Skirts with steel hoops wide enough to sweep half the room, bodices tightened until you're gasping, hats decorated with feathers, ribbons, and sometimes actual taxidermy birds. One careless sneeze, and the entire creation might collapse like a circus tent. Shoes come with tiny buttons that require a special hook to fasten. Gloves must be chosen to match the time of day, and accessories pile up until you're less a person and more a mobile jewelry display. By the time the last button is fastened, the last hat pin is adjusted, and the final lint brush has been whisked across your shoulders, you're exhausted. You've already sweated through 3 layers, and you haven't even left your room yet. You look magnificent, of course, like a walking advertisement for wealth and status. But inside, you're just praying you don't have to bend down, run, or God forbid, eat too much at breakfast, because there's no way you'll fit another bite in this corset. You glance in the mirror, straighten your cravat or adjust your skirt, and nod to your valet. He gives a small bow, mission accomplished. You step into the hallway, a little dizzy, a little drained, and very aware that you've achieved more before 9 in the morning than most people will manage in an entire day. Congratulations. You're fully dressed, completely exhausted, and officially ready to face breakfast. Another battlefield waiting just downstairs. You've made it out of bed, you've survived the bathroom, and you've been wrapped, buttoned, laced, and pinned into an outfit that says, "Yes, I'm wealthy enough to be miserable in silk." Now, there's only one thing between you and the rest of the day: breakfast. And in this house, breakfast is not just a meal, it's a performance. A slow, careful war fought with cutlery, toast, and family politics. Picture yourself stepping into a dining room so big it could double as a train station. Sunlight streams through windows taller than most children. The table stretches almost into the horizon, polished wood gleaming, silverware set out in neat ranks like an army of tiny soldiers. Each chair is placed with military precision, and heaven help the poor soul who dares to sit in the wrong spot. At the head of the table sits the patriarch, hidden behind his newspaper, rustling it with all the intensity of a hostage negotiation. On the other end, the matriarch presides over the teapot as if it were the Holy Grail. Around the table are children lined up like miniature chess pieces, some fidgeting, others trying their best to look invisible. Behind every chair stands a servant, perfectly still, radiating disapproval at the ready. Even the dog is here, lying under the table, waiting with quiet hope for a sausage to fall. You take your seat. A footman pulls the chair back and pushes it in again, as though you're incapable of basic motor skills. You unfold your napkin, stiff with starch, lay it across your lap, and prepare for battle. The food arrives in stages. There are kippers, kidneys, bacon so thick you could roll your boots with it, and eggs cooked in ways you never asked for. Toast sits in a rack on the sideboard, cold and rigid, as if intentionally prepared to break both your teeth and your spirit. The only thing guaranteed to be hot is the tea, poured with such ceremony you'd think the future of the nation depended on it. The rules are endless. Don't look too closely at your food. That would imply suspicion. Don't talk about the food either. That would insult the cook. Tear your bread. Don't bite it. Don't use your bread to wipe your plate, no matter how tempting that gravy looks. Spread your butter so thin it could almost be invisible, because apparently gluttony can be measured in millimeters. Even passing the marmalade is a political act. Hand it to the wrong person first, and you've made an enemy for life. Conversation is no easier. Children may only speak if directly asked. Adults may only bring up topics the patriarch approves of. That usually means the weather, last night's sermon, or whether the roses in the conservatory are blooming correctly. Under no circumstances should anyone mention money, politics, or Uncle Henry's gambling problem. And God forbid someone mentions Americans. One slip of the tongue, and breakfast becomes a silent standoff, broken only by the scrape of knives on plates. Your grandmother, wrapped in layers of black lace, sips her tea like she's reliving the siege of Sebastopol, her glare daring anyone to ask for more jam. The youngest child pokes at a kipper, wishing it were anything invented after 1890. You, meanwhile, do your best to look calm while calculating which fork to use for the kidneys and which one is safe for the jam. The wrong choice will not go unnoticed. Forks here are weapons, knives, tiny tests of loyalty, and every sip of tea, every glance across the table, is weighed, judged, and silently filed away for discussion later in the drawing room. Halfway through, the butler glides in, silent as a ghost, to announce the morning news. A stock fluctuation, a royal engagement, maybe the surprise arrival of a distant cousin. The family nods gravely, as if the fate of empires depends on their reaction. Then spoons clink, cups rattle, and the performance continues. You're not eating breakfast, you're surviving it. Your mind is juggling 10 things at once. How to cut your bacon without looking greedy, how to sip tea without slurping, how to avoid eye contact with your sibling, who will definitely start a silent war over the strawberry preserves. And while you're doing all that, the servants stand behind you, watching, waiting, ready to swoop in with a brush for a stray crumb or a refill of tea you didn't ask for. At last, the ordeal begins to wind down, but you can't simply stand and leave. Oh no, there's a ritual. Napkin folded just so, chair pushed back without scraping, a polite thank you to the matriarch. Only then can you rise, stomach full but soul slightly emptied, and prepare to face the rest of the day. Congratulations. You've survived breakfast in a Victorian millionaire's home. And though it felt less like a meal and more like an etiquette exam with bacon on the side, you've passed. At least for today. Now, as you step out of the dining room, ready to tackle correspondence and pretend you're in charge of your household, the truth is clear in this world. Even breakfast is theatre. Every sip, every bite, every glance is just another scene in the never-ending play of wealth and status. You've survived the gauntlet of breakfast. You've endured the cold toast, the silent glares, and the unspoken rules about marmalade. You're relieved to stand, push in your chair, and finally leave the battlefield of silverware behind. But here's the truth: you're not in charge of your day. Not really. Because behind every polished surface, every smooth moment, there's an entire hidden world of people making sure your life looks effortless. Welcome to the ecosystem of servants, the army that keeps a Victorian millionaire's house humming. Think of your mansion less as a home and more as a stage. You're the star, sure, but the servants are the crew, the stage hands, the lighting techs, the costume department, and sometimes the crisis managers. Without them, the whole show would collapse in an hour. A household of your size doesn't just need 1 or 2 helpers. It needs dozens, 20, 30, sometimes even more, each one with a job so specific it sounds made up. At the top of this hierarchy is the butler, the general of the house. He moves with the gravity of a judge and the mustache of a walrus that's seen too much. He runs the wine cellar, guards the silver, and knows every secret within a mile of the pantry. His job is not just to serve, it's to make sure you never notice that anything goes wrong. If you ever see him break into a run, it's time to panic. Second in command is the housekeeper. Picture a woman with a ring of keys that jangles like a medieval jailer's and eyes sharp enough to catch a speck of dust at 30 paces. She manages the female staff, controls the household accounts, and terrifies anyone foolish enough to question her cleaning schedule. If the butler is the general, she is the queen of the house. Respected, feared, and never, ever contradicted. Then there's the cook. She rules the kitchen like a battlefield. Steam, shouting, clanging pans, and the constant threat of a minor mutiny if you dare change meal times without notice. The cook has power. She decides whether your breakfast toast is tolerably warm or stone cold. She knows exactly how many joints of beef are in the larder and precisely how much wine has mysteriously evaporated. In the cellar, she may work below stairs, But believe me, she's in charge of more than you think. At the very bottom of the ladder is the scullery maid, the lowest of the low. Her whole day is spent elbow deep in dishwater, scrubbing endless piles of pots, pans, and plates, all while dodging the cook's wrath. She's young, often exhausted, and usually composing tragic poetry in her head about gravy stains. If life were fair, she'd be the heroine of the story. But in this house, she's invisible. Between those extremes, you have a small army footman in livery, whose main job is to stand around looking decorative and carry things from one room to another. They walk in pairs, synchronized like penguins at a parade, and open doors with such flourish you'd think there was a prize for most dramatic entry. You've got valets, whose sole purpose is to keep you from the dangerous task of dressing yourself, and who greet each fashion choice with the kind of subtle disappointment only the British have perfected. Chambermaids slip silently through bedrooms, straightening sheets and fluffing pillows before you even realize you left. Outside, gardeners trim the lawns until a single weed feels like an act of rebellion. Lamp lighters stalk the house at dusk, lighting every gas lamp with the serious air of a fencing master. Stable boys run back and forth in the yard, keeping the horses as polished as the silver. Coachmen wait by the carriages, coats buttoned, eyes forward, prepared to drive you to town at a moment's notice. The nursery is a kingdom of its own, ruled by a nanny who can hush a screaming child with nothing but a glare and a spoonful of mysterious tonic. And then there are the odd jobs. Roles that exist mostly because your neighbours have them, so you must too. The pudding maid, whose only responsibility is desserts. The lamp polisher, whose life's work is shining fixtures no guest will ever notice. Even the footboy, whose main duty is to stand in the hall, looking slightly confused. Each position is part of a system so sprawling and absurd it feels like a parody of itself. The truth is, your house is alive. It hums with movement. Servants glide in and out of rooms like ghosts, careful never to be seen unless absolutely necessary. Doors close quietly behind them. Fires are stoked without a sound. Carpets are swept so silently you'd think they cleaned themselves. And yet, if you listen closely, you'll catch the whispers, the quick, secretive glances. Because while you may be the master, they are the ones who know everything. Who drank too much sherry at Christmas? Who lost money on a bad investment? Who had a little too much fun at the last ball? Your reputation isn't guarded by your wealth. It's guarded by their discretion. Managing all of this doesn't come down to barking orders. It's diplomacy. You thank the staff just enough to seem gracious, but never so much that you seem familiar. You avoid names whenever possible, sticking to, "my good man," or "you there." Call the gardener by accident, and you'll be banned from the rose garden for a month. Forget to tip, and suddenly everyone knows about your embarrassing childhood nickname. The whole system runs on a delicate balance of respect, fear, and mutual survival. And here's the secret: the best-run houses are the ones where the family hardly notices the staff at all. Servants slip through back hallways, underground tunnels, and hidden doors designed so the wealthy never have to confront the people who actually keep them alive. You wake up to warm water, pressed clothes, and clean sheets, and never see the dozens of hands that made it possible. It's smooth, silent, and just a little eerie, like being served by particularly judgmental ghosts. But every once in a while, something cracks. You glimpse the cook's glare when the timing of dinner is off. You hear a scullery maid humming as she sneaks past with a tray. You notice the lamplighter pausing to sigh before moving on. Tiny reminders that the performance only works because real people are behind it. People with tempers, fears, secrets, and dreams they'll never share with you. So as you stroll from one polished room to another, it's worth remembering your life as a Victorian millionaire isn't built on marble, silver, or velvet. It's built on people. People you may never know by name. People who slip in and out of sight like shadows. People whose loyalty holds your household and your reputation together. Congratulations. You don't do chores. You You don't polish, sweep, or cook. You just glide. But only because a whole invisible army is making sure the world thinks you're effortlessly important. Afternoons in your mansion stretch on like a ribbon of polished wood, endless and gleaming, with very little to actually do. Because here's the truth: once the servants are set in motion, once breakfast has been endured, and once the morning letters are signed with great ceremony and almost no actual meaning, you're left with one pressing question: how do you pass the time? Remember, there's no TV, no radio, no streaming. Not even a newspaper that isn't days out of date by the time it reaches your table. The world outside is buzzing with factories, railways, and commerce, but inside your gilded walls, leisure is the real currency. And as a Victorian millionaire, you are expected to be very, very good at being idle. That's where parlour games come in. Picture the grand parlour, heavy curtains drawn, gas lamps flickering, and every surface covered in patterned upholstery so busy it could hypnotize you if you stared too long. Family portraits glare down from the walls, painted expressions daring you to live up to their stern expectations. Guests arrive dressed as though they're auditioning for a portrait themselves. Lace, velvet, and more feathers than an entire aviary. Everyone takes their place, and the long night of fun begins. First up is charades. Not the modern breezy version you might know, but a slow-motion Victorian affair where Aunt Beatrice tries to act out Macbeth and somehow ends up looking like a sheep with gout. You applaud politely because you must. Nobody ever dares to laugh too loud. Instead, you smile just enough to show you're amused, but not so much that you look undignified. Then comes the minister's cat. It's a game where each person, in turn, describes the minister's cat with an adjective that must begin with the next letter of the alphabet. The minister's cat is an adorable cat, a bold cat, a clumsy cat, and so on. This sounds fun for about 3 minutes until someone says, "The minister's cat is a scandalous cat," and everyone gasps, half laughing, half wondering if the actual minister's actual cat has been up to something shameful again. If the guests are feeling clever, someone suggests consequences, a collaborative story writing game. Each person writes a line, folds the paper, and passes it on. By the end, you're left with a bizarre tale about Lord Pidlington, a mysterious turnip, and a tragic rendezvous behind the stables. It's nonsense, but in a world with no Netflix, nonsense is gold. Music is the backbone of every evening. Someone is always volunteered, or voluntold, to play the piano. Usually a cousin who insists they know Chopin, but whose nocturnes sound suspiciously like variations of chopsticks. Everyone claps politely, even the butler, who is secretly wishing he were anywhere else. If the pianist is especially bold, they may launch into sea shanties on the concertina, turning your genteel gathering into what feels like a stormy night at a sailor's tavern. You applaud again, because not applauding would be social suicide. For those who dread music, there's always poetry. Someone pulls down a thick volume of Tennyson and drones for 10 minutes about moors, maidens, and mist. Guests nod solemnly, as if they're moved, though half of them are stifling yawns. Every so often, someone tries reading their own writing. This is never a good idea. Even the dog shifts uncomfortably when Cousin Harold shares his tragic epic about lost love and cabbage. Conversation fills the gaps, but it's no freer than breakfast. There are strict rules about what can and can't be said. Safe topics: the weather, the Queen's latest hat, whether the new railway line to Bath is running on time. Dangerous topics: politics, feelings, plumbing. If silence falls, there's a round of polite coughing, or someone strategically rearranges calling cards on the side table to break the tension. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a guest brings something novel: a magician with a trick deck of cards, or a stereoscope, a device that shows blurry three-dimensional images of someone else's holiday in Brighton. Everyone gasps, marveling at the future of technology, even though the picture is just two slightly fuzzy postcards side by side. Children, of course, are banned from these evenings. They're sent upstairs to the nursery, left to their own marbles and spinning tops, dreaming of living in a century where cartoons exist. You can almost hear their laughter drifting down the hall, a reminder that somewhere in the house, fun is actually happening. Meanwhile, downstairs, you sip tepid tea, applaud politely, and smile just enough to survive until the grandfather clock strikes a mercifully late hour. By then, guests gather their coats, mothers herd their daughters, and the parlour empties at last. You breathe a sigh of relief knowing tomorrow night will bring the exact same ritual all over again. That's the strange paradox of Victorian leisure. It looks elegant, it sounds impressive, but it feels like an endurance test, a carefully choreographed way to pass the hours between daylight and bed, while keeping everyone entertained enough not to riot and polite enough not to scandalize. Congratulations. You've survived another evening of parlour games and polite boredom. You're learning quickly being a Victorian millionaire doesn't mean freedom. It means never-ending performances. You've made it through another evening of parlour games and polite applause. The piano has been shut, the poetry books tucked away, and the last teacup cleared. But here's the thing about being a Victorian millionaire. Simple leisure isn't enough. It isn't enough to play charades or sip tea or nod at poetry that could put an owl to sleep. No, you must also prove your wealth in the most eccentric, absurd ways possible. And that's where pets and peculiar pastimes take centre stage. Because if you're rich in the 1870s, your dog isn't just a dog. Your parrot isn't just a parrot. They are living trophies, status symbols with fur and feathers. Proof that you can spend money not just on yourself, but on every creature that crosses your path. Let's start with the dogs. Little lapdogs reign supreme. The smaller and noisier, the better. A pug or terrier that fits in a teapot is considered a true treasure. These animals are pampered beyond belief. They're bathed in lavender water, dressed in silk or velvet coats, and sometimes introduced to guests as if they were visiting dignitaries. Your pug, for instance, has an entire wardrobe. Raincoat for wet walks, party frock for social calls, a tiny sailor suit, just in case there's a boating trip. If the dog's cravat clashes with the curtains, the butler makes a note, and if the dog decides to climb into the punch bowl wearing his top hat again, well, that's simply considered part of the entertainment. But dogs are only the beginning. Parrots become the Victorian version of smart speakers, except far more entertaining. A parrot that says, "Pretty Polly," is embarrassingly ordinary. A parrot that quotes Shakespeare, now that's status. A parrot that gossips about the vicar's wife in perfect French. That's enough to cement your reputation for the entire season. And yes, it's entirely possible your parrot's commentary at the dinner table is more amusing than most of your guests. Exotic pets are all the rage. Turtles, rabbits, even the occasional monkey or marmoset in a velvet jacket. The rarer, the better. Lord Cumberfield swears his cockatoo once attended tea with Queen Victoria, and you nod politely, pretending you believe him. Because in this world, eccentric stories are almost as valuable as the pets themselves. And then there are the horses. A Victorian millionaire must have a stable, sleek riding horses with custom saddles, glossy coats, and names drawn from obscure generals or family members no one likes to mention. A horse isn't just for riding, it's another chance to show off. When visitors tour the grounds, your horses are paraded like soldiers, perfectly groomed, ready to leap fences or trot in circles for applause. The head groom knows more family secrets than half your cousins, and he sometimes listens when you need to complain about Aunt Ethel's peacock. Ah yes, peacocks. Because what garden is complete without jewel-toned birds strutting across the lawn like feathered aristocrats? Their cries are loud, piercing, and utterly unnerving, but their beauty makes them indispensable. They're there to impress guests at garden parties, to remind everyone that your grounds are more opulent than most wedding venues. The postman, poor soul, has likely considered retirement after being startled one too many times by your feathered showpieces. Afternoons stretch out with these creatures as the backdrop. Guests are invited to admire the pug's wardrobe or the parrot's wit. Some days, you might even host a pet parade or a fancy dress contest for animals. Best dressed tortoise. Loudest ferret. Why not? It's chaos wrapped in lace and laughter, but in the competition of Victorian society, it's another way to stand out. Of course, pets aren't the only pastime. The lawns outside your mansion are arenas for croquet, lawn tennis, and archery. Croquet, in particular, is less about knocking balls through hoops and more about knocking your opponent's ball into the shrubbery with a smile. It's the perfect outlet for passive aggression, and everyone knows it. A subtle bump here, a cruel tap there, and suddenly your rival's game and mood spirals into ruin. All in good fun, of course. If the weather turns gloomy, and this being England, it usually does, you retreat indoors. Needlepoint whist and interminable rounds of card games fill the hours. Cousin Penelope, convinced she's a musical prodigy, insists on playing the flute until the dog howls. You sip your tea, nod politely, and pretend to enjoy it, knowing that this is the rhythm of Victorian leisure, elegant, exhausting, and always a little absurd. Because in the end, wealth isn't just about silk curtains or fine silver, it's about spectacle, about surrounding yourself with enough animals, hobbies, and eccentricities that no one ever doubts your status. So you fill your afternoons with barking, squawking, strutting, and the occasional squeal from a startled rabbit in a bow tie. Congratulations. You've mastered the menagerie of wealth. Your dog is dressed better than most of London. Your parrot outshines half the poets at court. And your peacocks have scared off another postman. Life is strange at the top. Strange, loud, and endlessly entertaining. You've paraded your pug in his sailor suit. You've politely clapped for the parrot quoting Shakespeare. And you've survived the chaos of croquet, played with lethal passive aggression. But now it's time to leave the city behind and retreat to the crown jewel of your fortune, the country estate. Because in Victorian England, having a mansion in town is impressive, but owning acres of drafty countryside is the real badge of honour. Picture it: the crunch of carriage wheels over gravel, footmen rushing out like startled geese, and a housekeeper waiting at the steps with her quarterly report on bats in the belfry. Your estate doesn't just whisper wealth, it shouts it in a voice so loud the neighbouring villages can hear. The house is enormous, grand, and slightly ridiculous. Portraits of grim ancestors line the walls, their painted eyes following you wherever you go. The library is bursting with books no one has touched since Victoria's coronation. The sitting room smells faintly of lavender, old boots, and secrets. And if you stand still long enough, you might hear the ghostly echo of someone from long ago having a nervous breakdown over the cost of firewood. The best part, or the worst, depending on the season, is the draft. No matter how many tapestries you hang, no matter how many fires the maids tend, there's always a cold breeze lurking just around the corner, ready to slip down your neck like an unwelcome hand. In winter, you wander the halls wrapped in shawls, your breath clouding in the air as though you've moved into an indoor ice rink. In summer, the place turns into a greenhouse for spiders and mildew no scientist has yet discovered. Breakfast here is a journey in itself. You leave your bedroom in search of tea and eggs, only to wind up lost in the East Wing, staring at taxidermy foxes and a hedgehog dressed in formal wear. You call for help. No one answers. By the time you make it back to the dining room, the eggs are cold and the dog has stolen half the bacon. But that's country life. It's not meant to be convenient. It's meant to be impressive. The grounds are just as overwhelming. Acres of rolling parkland, carefully shaped hedges, swan-filled lakes and mysterious follies that serve no purpose except to look old and romantic. Somewhere in the maze, a cousin you lost during Lent is still wandering, clutching a crumbling sandwich. The head gardener eyes you with suspicion, worried you'll demand roses in November or something equally impractical. Undergardeners toil endlessly, clipping and pruning until your hedges resemble things only the truly optimistic can recognize. And of course, no country house is complete without its social calendar. Weekends are filled with hunting parties, archery, and elaborate picnics where everyone silently competes over the best way to serve cucumber sandwiches. Evenings bring ghost stories by the fire, family scandals whispered in corners, and the occasional say-ain'ts where someone tries to summon great-aunt Mildred just so she can complain about the plumbing. Nightfall brings its own drama. The wind howls through the chimneys, windows rattle in their frames, and the floorboards creak like a ship at sea. You stumble through endless corridors by candlelight, convinced every shadow is either a burglar, a ghost, or that cousin you misplaced in the maze finally finding his way back. You open the wrong door and end up in the attic, shivering under the stares of moth-eaten dolls and wondering if you should rewrite your will. But the real story of these estates isn't just the drafty grandeur, it's the money behind them. How did fortunes like yours come to be? Old money insists it's always been there, quietly passed down through generations. New money insists just as loudly, quoting the family motto in Latin and hanging portraits of ancestors who were painted after the fact to make up for the lack of actual lineage. The truth, of course, is murkier. Fortunes came from shipping, tea, opium, anything that could be stacked in crates and insured against pirates. From sugar plantations in distant colonies, from railroads cutting across continents, from coal dug out of the earth by men you'd never meet. Maybe even from questionable ventures involving guano, because yes, people really did make fortunes in bird droppings. Whatever the source, it's never mentioned in polite company. You smile vaguely and say, trade, the same way you might whisper about an embarrassing rash. And while money builds the estate, it doesn't guarantee acceptance. Old aristocrats still look down their noses at new families, no matter how large the house or how many acres you own. That's why you fill your rooms with silver tea services, ivory-handled walking sticks, and family portraits, half of which are either pirates or people who pretended not to be pirates. It's not about comfort, it's about proving you belong, even if it takes 3 generations of strategic amnesia to do it. But no matter how the money was made, the responsibility of keeping it going is heavy. You sit in the study once a month with your solicitor, sideburns broad enough to serve as shelves, talking about investments, debts, and which cousin is most likely to disgrace the family this season. You know fortunes can vanish in a heartbeat. One failed mine, one scandalous marriage, one misplaced bag of diamonds at Christmas. And so the accounts are guarded more tightly than the silver. Still, the strangest truth is this: for all the grandeur, for all the portraits and polished floors and sweeping views, wealth doesn't guarantee happiness. The estates are heavy with silence, thick with expectation, and haunted not just by ghosts, but by the constant pressure to maintain the illusion of perfection. And yet, it's still better than being poor. So you glide down the corridors, smile at your guests, nod gravely during dinners that last 3 hours, and pretend the draft in the hallway isn't giving you another cold. Congratulations. You've left behind the city mansions and arrived at your country estate. A house so grand it could swallow you whole, and a fortune so mysterious nobody dares to ask where it really came from. You've toured your country estate. You've endured the drafts, the labyrinthine hallways, and the portraits of scowling ancestors daring you to redecorate. But here's the truth. It doesn't matter how many acres you own or how many swans you have terrorizing the lake. In Victorian England, wealth alone isn't enough. To survive and to shine, you must master the most dangerous game of all society. High society in this world isn't just a collection of parties and teas. It's a battlefield played with calling cards, polite visits, and tiny details sharp enough to make or break your reputation. One wrong fork, one misplaced word, and you're finished. Your mansion might still stand, but your name, exiled to Cornwall. It all begins with the calling card. A small piece of paper, but don't be fooled. This isn't stationery. It's your passport, your shield, your ticket to every ballroom and tea table that matters. The card must be crisp, thick, and embossed with just the right flourish. Too plain, and you look cheap. too ornate and you look desperate. Even the ink color matters. Black for mourning, gold for daring, burgundy if you really want people whispering about you behind their fans. When you arrive at someone's home, you don't just knock on the door. Heaven forbid, the butler meets you, silver tray in hand, waiting for your card. He inspects it with the same solemnity a priest gives communion. Then he disappears, leaving you to stand awkwardly in the hall, hoping your name carries enough weight to secure you a seat in the parlor. And that parlor is where the real games begin. You sit on a stiff-backed chair, teacup balance just so, and attempt conversation under the watchful eyes of hosts, rivals, and portraits of people you're expected to admire but can't quite identify. Conversation itself is a minefield. Too much praise for a rival's dress, and they'll know you're lying. Too little, and you're accused of jealousy. Never mention money, never mention trade, and absolutely never ask how someone's husband really made his fortune. If you're stuck, the safest escape hatch is hats. Everyone has an opinion about hats. Then there are the teas. A genteel battlefield disguised with china cups and little cakes. Sugar is politics. 1 lump means you're traditional. 2 means you're bold. 3 means you'll be whispered about until Christmas. The correct fork is the one furthest from your plate, unless you're in company so fashionable that forks have been banished entirely in favor of decorative tongs. And remember, saucers are for looking at, not for slurping. Invitations are the lifeblood of your social standing. A dinner, a ball, a weekend at a cousin's estate. Each one is both a blessing and a trap. Decline too often, and you'll vanish from the guest list altogether. Attend the wrong gathering, and you risk being associated with a family everyone else is secretly mocking. Every dance card, every dinner table placement is as strategic as a military map, and looming over all of it is scandal. Scandal is the shadow that never leaves your side. One misplaced letter, one dance with the wrong person, one laugh at the wrong joke, and you could be ruined. Servants read everything. Neighbors gossip endlessly. The vicar knows more about your private life than you do. A single slip, a hemline too short, a debt too large, a cousin who disappears into the garden with the wrong partner. And suddenly, your name is on everyone's lips for all the wrong reasons. So what do? You become a master of denial, a student of distraction. If someone whispers about your brother's failed investment in a Peruvian guano mine, you simply smile and pivot to the weather. If a rumor spreads about your daughter's suspiciously quick engagement, you praise the new rose varieties in the conservatory. And if all else fails, you retreat to the countryside until people find fresher gossip. With luck, by the time you return, someone else will have fainted in public or eloped with a footman, and you'll be free to sip your tea again in peace. Marriage, too, isn't about romance, it's business. Alliances forged over tepid lemonade and carefully supervised strolls. You don't marry for love unless you enjoy poverty. You marry for property, titles, and connections. A wealthy daughter might secure a crumbling castle. A titled but penniless son might marry a woman whose father owns half the coal mines in Yorkshire. It's a lifelong contract, more financial plan than fairy tale. And once the vows are said, everyone breathes easier, at least until the next round of matchmaking begins. And through it all, you must smile. You must bow at the correct angle, curtsy to the right depth, compliment bonnets without laughing, and dance the quadrille without stepping on anyone's toes. It is exhausting, it is relentless, and it is absolutely required. Because here's the thing in Victorian England, money buys you silk, carriages, and cold toast. But only society, only the approval of people just as bored and judgmental as you are, buys you legitimacy. Without it, you're just another rich upstart, locked out of the glittering rooms, left to wander your drafty estate alone with your dogs and your regrets. Congratulations, you've entered the social minefield, and until the day you draw your last careful breath, every step, every sip of tea, every card you leave on a silver tray will decide whether you thrive, or whether you're quietly exiled to Cornwall. You've survived the teas, the calling cards, and the endless balancing act of society. You've dodged scandal, whispered politely about hats, and made it through dinner without fainting into your soup. But there's still one mountain every Victorian millionaire must climb, and it's taller than your top hat: marriage. Because in this world, marriage isn't about romance. It isn't about gazing across a ballroom, hearts racing, or writing secret poems under moonlight. That's for novels and poets, not for people with fortunes to protect. Marriage here is business, plain and simple. A contract, a deal struck across teacups, forged with polite smiles, and written in ink by lawyers in drafty studies. From the moment your children are old enough to toddle around in sailor suits and pinafores, their futures are mapped out like railway lines. Sons must marry well enough to secure titles, estates, or at least enough land to keep the family from sliding down the social ladder. Daughters must marry into families whose names carry more weight than their dowries. It's not about love. It's about survival. Matchmaking isn't casual. It's a campaign waged by mothers, aunts, and grandmothers who wield family trees like weapons. Prospective spouses are examined as carefully as investments. Does he come with a castle, even if it leaks? Does she bring a dowry fat enough to keep creditors away? If neither property nor money is on the table, perhaps the family crest has enough shine to justify the risk. No one cares if the bride and groom have anything in common, or if they can even stand each other. What matters is whether the match strengthens the family's position. Courtship, of course, is public theatre. Every stroll in the garden is watched by chaperones. Every glance at a dance is recorded by gossips. Letters are read by mothers before they ever reach trembling hands. You're never really alone. You don't whisper secrets. You perform them, making sure they sound respectable enough to pass the drawing room test. If you so much as brush sleeves with the wrong person, half the county will be buzzing about it before breakfast. When the engagement is finally arranged, the families meet with lawyers. Contracts are drawn up like treaties. Dowries are counted. Settlements are negotiated. It's less a romance and more a boardroom negotiation, only with lace, fainting couches, and a lot more sighing. The wedding itself is a spectacle, a parade of lace, cake so dense it threatens the floorboards, speeches that drag on for hours, and gifts that are equal parts hideous and impractical. By the end, the bride and groom are legally bound, their futures tied together like two estates on a ledger sheet. Married life varies. Some couples stumble into genuine affection, learning to care for each other between polite dinners and separate wings of the house. Others settle into a cold truce, tolerating one another while quietly pursuing hobbies, travel, or, let's be honest, eccentric pets. If you're lucky, your spouse is charming. If not, they're terrifying. Either way, you adapt. And then come the children. They're less people and more investments. Tiny hairs dressed in spotless clothes, paraded out at family gatherings like living advertisements for the family name. They are raised by nannies, governesses, and tutors, while you, their parents, appear only for portraits, holidays, and carefully timed scoldings. At tea, they're allowed downstairs only after the silver is hidden and the family dog is banished outside. Their job is simple: sit, bow, curtsy, look perfect, and say as little as possible. Discipline is stern, affection rationed like sugar. Laughter is acceptable only at certain decibel levels. Opinions are discouraged. If a child steps out of line, pudding privileges vanish, or worse, they're threatened with boarding school in Scotland, which everyone agrees is a fate worse than death. Education, too, is strategic. Boys are groomed for Oxford, politics, and the art of avoiding bankruptcy. Girls are drilled in French, music, embroidery, and how to faint without smudging their makeup. And always, in the background, hovers the question of heirs. The eldest son is everything, the future of the estate, the name, the fortune. Younger children know their roles, marry quietly, enter the clergy, or simply exist without scandal. Rivalries between siblings are encouraged, in fact, baked into the system. Every posture correction, every Latin recitation, every piano recital becomes a test, a chance to climb one rung higher on the invisible family ladder. For the rebellious few who dare to marry for love, the consequences are brutal. Social standing plummets, invitations dry up, Aunt Mildred faints dramatically in the drawing room. Families whisper the word scandal, like it's contagious. In a world built on contracts, love is a liability no one can afford. So you nod politely, you sign the papers, you parade your children like prizes at the fair. And you pretend it's all about happiness, when really it's about survival. About keeping the name, the estate, and the fortune intact. Love may be optional. Money, titles, and alliances are forever. Congratulations. You've entered the business of marriage and family strategy. It's not about fairy tales. It's about making sure your children bow at the right angle, marry the right stranger, and carry the family name into yet another exhausting generation. You've secured your marriage alliances, paraded your children in sailor suits, and endured 100 conversations about hats without collapsing from boredom. But even the most carefully staged life inside your mansion can't last forever. From time to time, you must venture out into the world. And in Victorian England, travel isn't just movement. It's a full-blown ordeal. Pair that with the ever-present anxieties about health, and suddenly being rich feels a little less glamorous, and a lot more like a survival game. Let's start with travel. Imagine this: someone suggests a weekend in Bath, or a season in London, or perhaps a countryside visit to a cousin's drafty estate. Instantly, the entire household springs into action. Your valet begins consulting timetables so large they look like wallpaper. The lady's maid issues strict orders about hatboxes. A team of porters is called in to wrestle with towering stacks of trunks, parasols, and mysterious packages labelled essential, do not crush. The planning alone feels like preparing for a minor military campaign. Once the day arrives, the household looks like an ant colony in chaos. Footmen load trunks into the carriage. The coachman polishes the horses until their hides shine. Servants run in and out of doors, carrying sandwiches, lap robes, smelling salts, and enough blankets to withstand a small ice age. By the time you actually step into the carriage, you're already exhausted, and you haven't even left the driveway. Carriage travel is its own adventure. Every pothole feels like an earthquake, and even the finest suspension can't stop you from rattling around like dice in a cup. Conversation is attempted, but usually interrupted by bumps, jolts, or the occasional sheep blocking the road. The air is thick with the scent of leather, horses, and the faint whiff of snacks you brought along, because heaven forbid you arrive anywhere, even slightly hungry. Then there's the railway, the new marvel of the age.
Faster, yes.
Easier, not quite. Stations are a storm of steam, shouting porters, and aristocrats arguing about whether their dogs deserve first-class seating. You're herded into a compartment where luxury means velvet cushions and the hope that your fellow passengers don't insist on sharing their life stories. The train jerks forward, the scenery blurs into endless cabbage fields, and you brace yourself for hours of awkward small talk, lukewarm sandwiches, and suits sneaking in through the window. And let's not forget the bathrooms. Or rather, let's. Because Victorian train toilets are the stuff of nightmares. Balance, prayer, and a strong stomach are required. And even then, you'll come away questioning every decision that brought you to this point. Luggage, of course, is another beast. Even a short trip requires a mountain of trunks. Each one must be labelled, stacked, carried, and sometimes chased down when it develops a mind of its own. Heaven help you if your evening attire ends up in Bristol while you're stuck in Bath. Few things are more humbling than explaining to your hostess that your only option for dinner is yesterday's travel coat. By the time you arrive at your destination, whether a cousin's estate or a London townhouse, you're dazed, soot-streaked, and already longing for bed. Travel in this age is less about adventure and more about endurance. And yet, you must do it. Because to maintain your social standing, you must be seen. At the spas, at the railway, in the city drawing rooms. Travel is proof that you belong to a world bigger than your own drafty corridors. But if travel is exhausting, health is terrifying, wake up feeling a little off, call the doctor. He arrives in a top hat, bag bulging with tinctures, powders, and optimism. He bills by the hour. He asks about your humours, blood, bile, phlegm, and black bile, as if you're still living in ancient Greece. He pokes you with a thermometer that looks like it might double as a weapon. He frowns gravely, and then he prescribes something that sounds more like a dare than a cure. Laudanum is the favourite. A syrup of opium and alcohol, handed out for everything from headaches to heartbreak. It soothes, it numbs, and it ensures that half the population is just a little dazed at any given time. Children get it too. Teething. Give the baby opium. What could possibly go wrong? If that doesn't help, there's mercury. Rub it on your skin, swallow it, or let it seep into your system until you sweat, drool, and hallucinate. The worse you feel, the more convinced the doctor is that it's working. Mustard plasters are another delight. Fiery paste smeared directly on your chest until your skin burns like a forge. No pain, no gain. Has never been taken quite so literally. And then there are leeches. Victorians adore leeches. Fever, leeches. Aching joints, leeches. Existential despair. Just stick a few on your temples and hope for the best. Hospitals use tens of thousands of them a year, and apothecaries practically run side hustles selling them by the jar. If you're squeamish, too bad. The leeches are coming, whether you like it or not, for more dramatic ailments, broken bones, the vapours, or the ever-fashionable consumption. The prescription might be bed rest, beef tea, and fresh air. Beef tea, in case you're wondering, is not tea at all but thin, salty broth so unappetizing it makes you wish you'd stuck with the laudanum. As for surgery, only as a last resort. Anesthesia is still experimental, antiseptics are a novelty, and the best advice you'll get is to bite down on a stick and think happy thoughts. If you survive, you're a local legend. If you don't, well, at least your family gets a story to tell at the next dinner party. For hypochondriacs, the Victorian world is a playground of quackery. You can strap on electric belts that promise to stimulate your organs, swallow homeopathic sugar pills, or follow the latest advice to drink seawater every morning. You might be packed in ice, sprinkled with arsenic, or bathed in turpentine for the complexion. If nothing else, it keeps life interesting. And yet, through all this, you endure. Somehow, maybe because your body adapts, maybe because your will is stronger than the medicine, or maybe because you're just lucky. You sip your laudanum, dab your chest with mustard paste, and pray the leeches don't escape onto the carpet. And when someone suggests a brisk walk in the smog, you nod and say, why not? Because in this world, a brisk walk in the smog is sometimes the least dangerous option you've got. Congratulations. You've survived travel and medicine as a Victorian millionaire. Your nerves are rattled, your doctor is probably drunk, and your luggage may or may not be in another county. But you're alive, and in this age, that's victory enough. The day has been long. You've rattled through train rides, endured doctors with leeches, and swallowed more laudanum than seems wise. You've survived breakfast wars, croquet feuds, and another cousin's flute recital that made the dog howl. And now, at last, the sun dips below the horizon. But if you thought nighttime would bring peace, think again. Because in a Victorian millionaire's home, night is its own theatre, equal parts ritual, dread, and melodrama. It begins with the round. As darkness settles, the butler and a footman march through the house like wardens on inspection duty. Every window is checked, every bolt tested, every lock rattled and relocked. The butler carries a ring of keys so heavy it could anchor a ship, and he treats each door as if a burglar is waiting just outside, eager to steal the silver, or worse, the good marmalade. Thin glass, rattling sashes, and doors that groan louder than your grandmother mean security is more about the appearance of safety than actual protection. Still, every latch is double-checked, and sometimes triple-checked, just in case. Candles are lit, one by one, across the house, though each flame feels like an invitation to disaster. Gas lamps hiss to life with a flick of a long match, their glow both magical and faintly terrifying, because everyone knows a misstep could send the whole house up in flames. Shadows stretch across wallpaper patterned with flowers and vines, turning every corner into a stage for the imagination. After the house is secure, the family gathers in the drawing room. The fire crackles, casting light that dances over embroidered chairs and portraits that always seem to watch too closely. Here, the nightly entertainment begins. Ghost stories are whispered, tales of phantom carriages clattering down lonely roads, banshees wailing on the moors, haunted portraits whose painted eyes follow you when you move. Someone swears they hear footsteps in the attic. Someone else insists there's a moan in the chimney. It's probably the wind, or the housekeeper discovering a moth hole in the drapes. But no one says that out loud. Children, wide-eyed and trembling, cling to their nannies. Aunts gasp dramatically into lace handkerchiefs. Even the butler pauses, just for a second, as if he, too, wonders whether the ghost of great-aunt Mildred might actually be peering in from the hallway. Eventually, the yawns begin. One by one, the family climbs the grand staircase, each figure carrying a candlestick like a pilgrim in some strange nightly procession. The upstairs corridor is long and drafty, lined with doors that creak and carpets worn thin by generations of nervous pacing. Every flickering flame throws shadows that leap and twist. Every draft rattles the windows, making you wonder if someone, or something, might be trying to get in. Your own bedroom waits, a fortress of heavy curtains, embroidered pillows, and enough bedding to bury you alive. The fire glows faintly in the hearth, stoked one last time by the maid before she retreats backward, bowing, as if even leaving the room must be performed. The under-butler makes his final check of the locks. And, if you're lucky, the cook might send up a tray of cold pie, along with a look that suggests you don't deserve it. You change into nightclothes that are somehow heavier than half your daywear, slippers swapped for sturdier ones. Because if there's an emergency, you don't want to face it barefoot. The mattress creaks as you climb in, and the canopy overhead looms, fringe dangling like the arms of 100 tiny ghosts. You pull the covers high, not just for warmth but for protection. From burglars, from bats, from cousins sneaking biscuits in the pantry, from whatever might be lurking in the corridor just beyond your door. Then comes the ritual of extinguishing. Candles are blown out one by one. Careful, don't inhale too much wax. Careful, don't set your nightcap alight. The room falls into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of embers and the steady tick of clocks. Dozens of clocks, all slightly out of sync, chiming and clicking like the heartbeat of the house itself. Sleep, however, doesn't come easily. The house is too alive. Every floorboard groans. Every window rattles. The wind howls down chimneys with a voice that sounds suspiciously human. Somewhere in the distance, the family dog barks once, sharply, then falls silent, leaving you to wonder what he saw. You lie awake, listening. To life. To afterlife. To the reassuring tread of servants making their last rounds. You close your eyes, but your mind conjures every story you heard in the drawing room. Phantom carriages, haunted portraits, banshees shrieking across the moors. You know it's just imagination. You know it's just the draft. And yet, you pull the covers tighter. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body sinks into the mattress, cocooned in blankets. Dreams arrive, though they are not gentle. Locked doors, lost keys, corridors that stretch forever, and shadows that whisper. You wake briefly, heart pounding, before drifting off again. And so the cycle repeats, until the faint chime of the grandfather clock announces that morning is near. Congratulations. You've survived the Victorian night. Candles, drafts, burglars, ghosts, and all. And as the first light slips through those heavy curtains, the servants are already stirring, preparing another round of apologies, routines, and rituals. Your day begins again. The night has passed. The candles burned low, the clocks ticked on, and the shadows eventually melted into morning light. Somehow you survived the drafts, the rattling windows, the whispered ghost stories, and the endless parade of servants tiptoeing in and out of your bedroom. You wake, not refreshed exactly, but intact. And that, in a Victorian millionaire's home, counts as victory. As you lie there beneath a mountain of monogrammed blankets, you think back on the day before. From the moment you opened your eyes, you were wrapped in ritual. Servants scurried. Water was poured. A valet buttoned, tucked, and sighed. You endured breakfast like it was a diplomatic mission, each bite of bacon weighed against unspoken rules. You floated from room to room, trailed by whispers and footsteps, pretending that comfort was your daily right when in reality, it was a carefully staged illusion. You remember the games in the parlour. Aunt Beatrice's terrible charades. Cousin Penelope's flute, which made the dog consider a career in howling. The endless cups of tepid tea. The applause that wasn't for joy but for survival. You remember the pug in his sailor suit, the parrot quoting Shakespeare, the peacock screaming at the gardener, and the guests nodding politely as if any of this were normal. You remember the drafts in the country house, the ancestor portraits glaring down, and the unsettling suspicion that one of them might actually blink if you looked too long. You remember the journeys, bone-rattling carriage rides, suit-filled train compartments, toilets best left unmentioned. You remember the doctor, his bag of poisons and optimism, telling you that leeches, mercury, and opium were all that stood between you and certain doom. You remember the sense that even in wealth, safety was fragile. One wrong medicine, one wrong candle, one wrong scandal, and it could all come crashing down. And through it all, the constant shadow of society. Calling cards left on silver trays, teas poured with judgment disguised as sugar, dances where one misstep could ruin a reputation for years. Scandals whispered, letters intercepted, cousins exiled. Marriage treated as merger. Children raised more as advertisements than individuals. The delicate performance of wealth was never really about comfort. It was about being seen, being measured, being deemed worthy enough to sit at the table with people just as bored, just as watchful, just as desperate to prove themselves. And now, as the sun pushes its way into your grand, drafty bedroom, you realize the strange truth of it all. Being a Victorian millionaire isn't about freedom. It isn't about ease. It's about theatre. Every gesture, every meal, every garment, every pet in a tiny hat is part of a performance staged for an audience of neighbours, rivals, servants, and society itself. But here's the comforting part: for all its absurdities, this world is still recognisably human. People laughed at the wrong times. They blushed, stumbled, sighed, and dreamed. They feared embarrassment more than poverty. They found ways to pass long, dull evenings with games, stories, and music, just like we do today, though with far more lace and far less electricity. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, smaller, simpler, hopefully warmer, be grateful. Grateful for pajamas that don't require an army to fasten. Grateful for showers that don't explode in clouds of steam. Grateful for dinners that don't demand 30 forks and an argument over cucumber sandwiches. Grateful for central heating, for Wi-Fi, for the fact that you don't need a calling card to visit a friend. History is absurd. It's heavy, inconvenient, and often ridiculous. But it also reminds us how endlessly inventive people can be, how stubbornly hopeful, how willing to dress up dogs in sailor suits or faint gracefully into a chaise lounge, all in the name of keeping up appearances. And maybe that's the gentlest lesson of all, that whether rich or poor, powdered or plain, people are always just trying to make sense of the world around them, trying to find meaning, trying to look important, trying to get through breakfast without scandal. So close your eyes now. Let the laughter of parlour games fade. Let the drafty corridors disappear. Let the peacocks stop screaming. You don't have to keep up appearances anymore. You don't have to impress anyone with your cutlery choices or your perfectly folded napkin. You can just rest. Good night, and may your dreams be more comfortable than a 12-foot bed under the watchful gaze of judgmental cherubs. Sleep well, and thank goodness you're not a Victorian millionaire.